Our policy is simple. What we see in current post-conflict societies is that often the rebels that have previously fought often get prosecuted because of fighting in the past and causing some form of disruption in the social network. Our policy is then to say, we are going to pardon you, we're no longer going to prosecute you, just join our military and work towards a greater society. That means these individuals will not have to go through a trial, they don't have to go through a prison sentence, they adopt this and they just work for the military, and then the matter has passed. I'm going to tell you a few things in my speech. I want to, one, analyze a post-conflict society for you. I'm going to tell you how it's very unstable, why this instability is bad. Ultimately, I'm going to show you why we are going to build towards stability by co-opting these rebel groups, and let's talk about the many benefits by having them in the military. We'll end this off with a slight principle note on why I'm giving these pardons are more than legitimate. Let's talk about the first thing, post-conflict societies. We need to recognize that these often are societies built after the Civil War, right? So a new government often is elected, right? There has been some form of change from the regime after the dust has settled in the fight. We think post-conflict societies are often better for the people because people are working towards a greater ideal, working towards a greater society eventually. But often there lies great instability in a post-conflict society. Why? Because many a times there are still some rebels who don't agree to the cause, and these rebels often take part in guerrilla warfare. This guerrilla warfare often exists underground because individuals are worried, no thanks, that they will get arrested, right? And this is necessarily bad because we think, insofar as we're talking about majority of people settled on an opinion, and there are only some fringe groups that are against this, we rather work towards a more stable collective group. Also, instability exists insofar as because this is a newly elected state, a newly run government, that risk regional threats, right? So some countries realize that because you are starting to be weak, there's a chance that they might want to attack you based on your military vulnerability. A bit more later on about why it's especially good that we're having rebels in the military. Okay, so instability exists insofar as there are some form of guerrilla warfare going on, and that often is a new government that's going shaky. How then do we work towards a more stable society? No thanks. We think often we need to recognize the characterization that many of these people fighting underground, right, often are really just fighting because they worry for prosecution, right? If I don't come out to them, they make it their dilemma is that if I don't exist underground and I don't try to fight the government through guerrilla warfare, no thanks, they're going to be prosecuted. We think there are large amounts of people, and we see this in places in civil wars in the past. What we can do is that we lure them, or rather we give them really a trade-off by saying, don't fight me, because often we think people do get tired of fighting. We say, and we try to understand their opinion, right? We don't make them feel at the threat of us prosecuting them if they don't otherwise fight, right? So we think we can lure people out of fighting and can build towards a more stable government insofar as we offer them a mechanism that protects them along the process. We think that's great, but no thanks. Okay, let's talk about why is stability important, right? Because ultimately, if we can make trade-offs with rebel groups by telling them, you don't have to fight, we are going to offer you a way out of the place and not make them feel like fighting just because they don't get prosecuted. We then can work towards a society that's more cohesive, and this is necessarily good for three reasons, right? One, you can work on infrastructure development in the country. Two, you can get the economy starting to run because other countries really see greater ability to invest in you. And three, perhaps we can work towards greater political leanings. Yes, sir?
So are you willing to pardon people in jail, for example, for human drug testing?
No, because there are some things that we will never pardon people for. We don't think it's our burden to say that every single rebel is going to be pardoned under our side. But what we think reasonably we can defend is that if this particular rebel just committed the crime of fighting against the state, we're more than happy to say that time is past, a bit more about this in principle. So then we think we build towards like stability, right? Because insofar as now we can say, like, don't fight me because you feel like there's no other way out, because we are giving you a way out, and when we can work towards a society where we can have these people inside. It's also more, the second idea is that really is a message sent, right? Where we are more than happy to take in the opinions of the rebel groups by incorporating them into our society. We're not going to fling them to one side and disenfranchise them from the system. We think that's a great benefit as well. Let's talk about why it's especially better, right, that we get them into the military, right? Why this ultimately builds to a more stable society. One, let's start by recognizing the rebels are really pretty damn good at fighting, right? They're very, very good, but insofar as they've been very disciplined and they know because they know how weak they can be if they're separated, they learn these lessons from the war, right? We think, insofar as they are very good fighters, and much like the Gurkhas or the Swiss Guards, they have particular sets of skills and strength in numbers. We think by co-opting them into our military, that objectively makes us better. Why? Because we can work towards stability in two ways. One, stability inside the government. Insofar as we are talking about societies where people generally support there's like enough support for a government to have like legitimate running, we think we can work towards stability by clamping down perhaps on groups that still want to fight, right? Maybe that's one way we can do it if they don't want to accept our pardon. But second way we create stability is that we defend ourselves against regional threats, right? So like if we are talking about Syria, talking about Israel or like places like Singapore, right? We'll realize that the military is especially important because often you can face like threats from countries around you. We think insofar as we can start co-opting these rebel groups and like asking them to build our defense against the people in the region, we think that's a very brilliant way to start. Especially important because we tell you that many times the military in post-conflict societies are rather weak. Why? Because many times they've just come out of fighting, right? So even if you're talking about sheer numbers, the numbers have shrunk. We think it's better to have the numbers from the rebels as well. But even if you're talking about skills and stuff like that, the reason why we are more than happy to stand for rebels joining us is because they have these particular set of skills to fight in the past. And we think it's a great way to blend our military such that even in the region we can build a stability as a country. That means we can defend ourselves against other people, which is a core construct for any form of societal development in the future. Let's also talk about the brief idea, right? So what have I shown you thus far? That post-conflict society is unstable. We think we can lure people into stability by giving them this ability to not fight, by giving them an opt-out clause, no thanks, and we think we can working towards a strong military that can help us in this stability. Okay, now I'm going to characterize for you why it's great to have these more reasons why it's great to have them in the military. Many times we recognize that they might say that rebels will fighting and infighting will occur. No, we disagree. Because many times these rebels themselves have ingrained a military mindset and a strict chain of command. We think insofar as we implement that with our military, they will always be kept in check by the officers, and we think that's very, very plausible, and that's how military law works. The special characteristic of the military is that you have so much more oversight over your people. We think, therefore, infighting won't exist, right? And more than that, you can get these people inside. Okay, let's talk about winning the support of the people. Because recognizing that many times these rebel tribes, right, unlike 90-10, rather the majority is more like 40-60 on who supports the new government, we think we can start incorporating the citizens who otherwise support the rebels by telling them that we are standing for you as well, right? And we hear your opinion. Let's talk about last principle. Why it's more than legitimate to offer us pardons. Ultimately, this stands on the idea that many times society often build their laws to work towards a greater societal ideal. We think insofar as the government decides there's this moral and legitimate trade-off to make by pardoning them for the sins for the past crimes and by working towards a greater future by building a more stable world, we think there's more than principle like a legitimate decision to make. For all these reasons, we're happy to propose.
The main problem in their side is that they never truly characterize what rebels do, who rebels are and what actually are the tendency for these rebels to do things, right? Because from our side, I'll tell you that rebels time and time again have proven that once given a certain situation or given a certain opportunity to be able to be in a certain things of power, they're gonna have the audacity to do these kind of things. We tell you that rebels are people that are very intolerant to authority. Rebels are people that do not listen once they're given orders to do so. We think that we cannot have these people in our military because of the status of our state, because if we really want to be able to stabilize, we cannot have a dysfunctional military. We cannot have these kinds of intolerant people in our military, right? So we see, and also aside from that, we do not see the urgency of this policy anyway, because what really is the importance of having these rebels in a military when you can have your own military, for example, and these rebels don't exactly have the kind of characteristics that you would want in your military anyway, right? So what is the burden that we're going to try to prove to you? Firstly, I'll tell you how these rebels are very harmful once they're in the military, and secondly, I'll tell you why they don't deserve the pardon that their side wants to give them, right? But before I go to my arguments, a few rebuttals. Firstly, because in his speech, he mentioned that these rebels sometimes do not agree with the new regime that they're being put in, right? So already on their side, they already concede to us that there are times when rebels do not agree with the new government. There are times when the rebels do not agree to the people in power, right? So then, if given that characterization, why would you allow these people to be in the military that so fight for your country anyway, right? And secondly, he also said that these rebels, we want them in our military because they're so good at fighting, and we need that kind of things in our military, right? But aside from being good at fighting in a military, you need more important things too. Like you need to be able to execute commands correctly. You need to be able to listen to your authority and be able to execute these things without hesitation, right? And given the characterization that I told you about rebels, I don't think these rebels will be likely to do these kinds of things. No, thank you. I'll take you after my first argument. So I have two arguments for you today. Firstly, I'll tell you principally why it is very unjust to pardon these rebels. And secondly, I'll tell you how you increase the propensity for an even less stabilization of the country, right? But to my first argument first, on how it is very unjust to principally pardon these people. Because the first problem on their side is that they didn't really tell us principally why these rebels do deserve to be pardoned. And in the converse, we're going to tell you why they can't be pardoned, because principally you have to argue this argument, right? So why is it principally unjust to pardon these rebels? Because for you to be able to pardon someone, they have to have made a benevolent action proportional to the atrocities that they have done. But then what have the things that these rebels have done, right? We know that these rebels have killed a lot of people. These rebels have overthrown a lot of places. These rebels have created a lot of atrocities that is certainly not benevolent, right? So given that characterization, why do they deserve the kind of pardon that you decided trying to give when it is definitely not proportional to the atrocities that they have done, right? We believe that on our side, there is no action to make the rebels to receive the pardon proportional to the atrocities that these rebels have committed. Simply putting them in a military, no matter what they do in that military, no matter if they do benevolent things in those military, it is not enough for these people to still be pardoned because of the amount of atrocities that these rebels usually do, right? So then why is it so bad for the government to have these rebels in the first place? And why is it so bad for this government to have these rebels in the kind of military, right? Because if you have these people that don't deserve this kind of pardon in your military, and you have these people that don't deserve this kind of thing, what does it serve for the government, and what does it show you what the government thinks, right? Fine, go ahead.
Take on the burden that these people deserve a pardon, insofar as we show that the pardon is useful to them and the law should be adapted to help the country develop.
Well, you have to understand that you can't just pardon anyone in today's society, right? When you pardon someone, there needs to be a justification for you to do so. If you just pardon anyone, then you're gonna allow these people to get away with the things that they have done, and we don't want that on our side, right? But to my second argument, I'm gonna tell you and I'm going to tell you how you increase the propensity for even a less stabilization. Because already from this first speaker here, from the PM here, they already characterized you how important it is to stabilize your country and the time that you have, right? Because these countries have just gone through war and things like that, and we want this country to stabilize and things like that. But given the characterization of rebels that I've given you a while ago, given the characterization that I've given you a while ago, why is it so harmful to have these rebels in the government in relation to the stabilization of your country? We tell you that in the end of the day, if you have these intolerant people in the country and if you have these intolerant people in the military, then since your country is very, very vulnerable because they're in a post-conflict situation, we think that it increases the propensity for these rebels to overthrow the kind of government that you're trying to have, and you increase the propensity for these rebels to go against the authority because the state is already so weak, right? You're giving these rebels the medium and the opportunity to be able to do these things. And even so, even if the government was bad, right? Even if they tell us that the government was bad and they want to overthrow these kind of things, we don't believe that coup d'etats and military means is a good way to overthrow a government. We'd rather do it through political means like voting and things like that. Because we tell you, if you have these rebels in the military and they want to start something like that, they're gonna go through these things like coup d'etats and things like a military means to overthrow a government because of their natural tendency to go through these kind of things to military means, right? We think that the rebels, because of how they are, will do these kinds of things. So how do these rebels usually think in these kinds of situations, right? Because if I'm a rebel and I'm in a military and the government the government is doing something that I wouldn't want, and I already have the arms and I have arms, for example, of course I would team up with my other rebel people and just go against the military given the arms that I've given, right? So given that we are in a very less stable society, we cannot risk the chance of having these rebels in the military because you give them the propensity and it increases the propensity for them to do these kinds of bad things that we don't want in our society. Thank you.
We think of what they fundamentally never once tried to deal with that appeared in Milton's case for today was why exactly we think that it's far better for us to work towards post-conflict stability as compared to continuously pushing out the rebels and letting them fight guerrilla warfare and continue making them continue waging war against the regime. We thought it's far worse on their side, and the comparative is that they're going to continuously suffer violence in the new regime. They're never going to work towards stability insofar as they always look back at what happened during the conflict and never do what is actually valuable for the state. There's just two questions. One, who exactly are the rebels you're talking about? Two, whether it's principally justified for us to provide them a pardon, in which they merely dismiss the point that my first speaker talked about in his speech today. Let's firstly ask who exactly are the rebels. They provided a really flimsy characterization on the start. The only line they actually appear in their speech was that they disrespect authority, and therefore it's very harmful that they provide them with arms, they give them the ability to overthrow the state. Why is this not true? We give you a few reasons. That one, we think the people who we are talking about in this debate today are people who are going to probably accept the pardon policy, which probably means that to some extent they're probably people who are not as antagonistic to the state anyway. But that is the characterization they need to deal with. The burden on their side is that they always need to deal with, even if the rebels are willing to cooperate with the state. Why exactly is that on their side they're still not willing to give them the pardon, not willing to give them any ability to work in the military? But let's say that the worst case scenario. Let's say that somehow rebels have disrespect authority and hate the state. Let's examine why exactly rebels fight in the first place against the old regime. We tell rebels fight in the first place because they're misrepresented in the state, because they lack a voice and they lack the ability to defend themselves. Because we look in countries like Syria, look in countries like Turkey, right, when they oppress people who then turn into rebels. We look at Colombia, where the groups of oppressed people who don't get represented in the government then becomes rebel groups in society. We tell you this gets far worse on the side. That any kind of disrespect of authority gets far worse on the side. Insofar as they still continue to overpower, not giving rebels a voice and not giving them ability to defend themselves. Why do we solve this? We just give them an incentive to want to go with the government. We tell them they enough the ability to defend themselves and the people they were fighting for in the civil war in the past. We tell you this is important insofar as this is precisely what we are able to sway the rebels to want to cooperate in the government in the first place, which is extremely hard on their side. This is something they can never achieve achieve on their side. Let's do the comparative, even in the best case scenario, that somehow these rebels will end up fighting against government. Why we tell you it's far better on our side? Because when you acknowledge the comparative is this, the rebels to some extent, if they're really as bad as you talk about, the rebels really hate the new government, they're probably going to be fighting anyway. It's extremely hard for a new government with a weak military to want to find all the rebel groups and take them all out of the country. And therefore, what's the comparative on the side? Comparative on the side is that rebels are going to be fighting guerrilla warfare. We've seen this in numerous civil wars, which have fought for years and years because there's no ability for you to take down rebel groups in this country. So the government government in general, it just has no capability to do so. So the comparative is this: that on their side, rebels will still be fighting on their side, which is something they never once dealt with on their side. This essentially means that any kind of harm that happens on our side is going to be further amplified on their side. Because on our side, if they fight the military, if they do any kind of weak chain of commands, we tell you that at least on our side, we can prosecute them under things like military law. Right? We can do stuff like prosecute under martial law. We can keep them in discipline within the commands of the higher ups in the military. These are all stuff they cannot do on your side. Insofar as no way you can track who exactly are the rebels on your group, who exactly are the ones, where exactly they're hiding in the society. But here's where we bring out the new point, right? Like they told us that rebels somehow cannot follow the military, follow minister, and they cannot follow the chain of commands. They're not exactly good for the military. Let's explain to you why that's not true. If I move on, yes, sir.
Ma'am, are you willing to pardon drug lords who constantly fight against the state?
But drug laws are completely different. They're not in the debate today, right? Like drug laws clearly has no value to the state at all. They have no value to the state at all because they can't do anything that's go value the state. And drug laws are people who clearly does not belong in the military. We don't think that's part of the debate today. We don't think it's a contradiction in our principle. We don't think it's a contradiction in our principle if we say no. We don't think that's even relevant in the debate today. But let's continue on this case. Why we tell you that rebels are at the best value to the military? It's something they never responded, so we take it as a conceit. And why is this important? Because when you recognize that rebels are actually good at fighting, the rebel groups in the first place work very much like an army. They have a chain of commands. They have people who are disciplined within rebel groups. So you need to recognize that only way for rebel groups to gain any kind of support, any kind of ability to fight against government is only if they're strong enough and disciplined enough, have a clear aim in terms of how they're going to fight against the old regime. And this is important. Why so? This is something that no one's responded, by the way. We tell this is important because this means that you get people who are actually valuable in terms of fighting back into the military. This means that you're able to solidify things like stability in a country that's newly built, right? This means that in an extremely weak military that's newly formed, we're able to get people who know how to fight and know how to have the ability to defend the country in the military. We tell you that insofar as they consider to this, we tell you that they need to deal with, in the best case scenario, as to why they are unwilling to recruit people who are extremely valuable in the army on our side. But here's a few arguments that they never once dealt with on their side. We tell you that they never once dealt with why exactly these rebels are important in terms of even if they are not like the best at fighting anyway. We say these rebels are important because of garnering support back in the civilians for the state. We need to recognize that rebel groups and countries to some extent receive some kind of popular support from the people. Why is this important? Because we recognize that insofar as in new governments, what you need to recognize in post-conflict societies, that the government often requires a huge amount of support to be able to function in the first place, to prevent precisely what they're trying to talk about, like overthrowing of the state, right? Given they want to defend overthrowing of the state, they need to tell us how they're going to prevent that on their side. Here's why we prevent it on our side. Because what we need to recognize is that people still continue to support the rebels once they see that the rebel groups that they're fighting for their rights are not represented in a state. Once they see that rebel groups that are fighting for their rights are able to are still continuously, like the state is still antagonistic towards them, right? This is why we see things like guerrilla warfare, where rebels are able to hide in civilian homes because civilian has consented to letting them hide in civilian villages, and rebels are able to use civilian resources to be able to fight against the state. This is precisely what they try to prevent on their side. Things like overthrowing, things like civilians fighting as a government. That is important, and we challenge the second and third speaker to come out and deal with it. That is important insofar as their end goal is to achieve stability. We try that given that they never responded, they will achieve it far better on our side. Let's move on to the second question. Why exactly is why we think is principally justified? No, thank you, sir. What they told us is that these rebels don't deserve pardon with no analysis whatsoever. They never once dealt with what exactly came out in first people. A few reasons why we tell you they deserve pardon. One, we think they need to deal with the fact that in conflicts, we need to recognize the necessary evil that to some extent people are going to die in war. We tell you they regret this, but we recognize that even in new government states, like the new government there are probably people who commit crimes against humanity anyway. Because you need to recognize that crimes against humanity just comes as necessary evil that comes with conflict. That you're inevitably going to kill civilians when you need to be able to bomb government buildings. We need to be able to attack government officials, be able to take down the old regime. And therefore, we tell you that given that this is necessarily true, we are far more willing. We are willing to trade off like prosecuting them in exchange for societal good. Why so? Because we need to recognize that in a post-conflict society, what's important is not that you go back and look at the conflict and look at where exactly we went wrong the conflict, but we need to be able to look past the conflict, to be able to look past working towards stability. This is precisely how post-conflict societies are able to work towards success, right? You don't see what we need to do from then on to be able to achieve achieve some kind of success. Instead of continuously looking back at what happened in the old regime and prosecuting people who are potentially capable of contributing to society. We tell you the contribution to society far outweighs the harms that happen in the conflict itself. We tell you that it's far more deserving, given that we're able to achieve some kind of societal change within society. We're able to achieve stability. And because of all these reasons, we tell you that we're firstly able to achieve our end goal far better in terms of achieving stability and preventing the next overthrow in a new regime. I'm extremely proud to propose.
My speech for you today is going to be relatively unconventional. The first thing I'm going to do for you is recharacterize this debate so that the debate becomes clear, right? Because clearly government side is operating under characterizations that are very suited for their side and are only very comfortable for their side. We need to start operating in a more realistic world, right? Because what exactly is the logic we get from their side? The logic that we get is that rebels are going to continue fighting, therefore it's not going to allow us stability, therefore we're not going to be able to create a stable government. I raised two POIs, asking one, are you going to pardon drug lords who fight against the government? And two, are you going to pardon people, for example, who do human drug testing? The reason why it is important to the debate is because these are still problems that the government has to deal with. If your logic is that they cause problems towards the government, then why don't we pardon murderers, for example? Why don't we pardon drug lords, for example? These are the same type of people who cause headaches towards the government as well. You need to provide us why is exactly exclusive only for rebels. So I'm going to move on. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to my one constructive. And after that, I'm going to provide you the overall framework of both sides and use comparisons. And in that comparisons, I'm going to make my rebuttals. Let's move on to the one constructive first. Because what exactly do we get coming from our side? The characterizations we get from our side is that one, rebels use violent means. This is something that both sides conceded to. But two, you have to look at that rebels are incredibly intolerant. So what they assumed to say on their side when they told us that these post-conflict countries are countries that are very unstable. So you're really conceding that mistakes are going to be made. We question now, if rebels are in the military and are very intolerant, why won't they use the power that they have within the military to form coup d'etats, for example, which my partner tried to tell you? We never got any response. But secondly, the last characterization we gave to you for rebels is that they're never going to be using political means, right? Because we tell you that for a country to become stable, what you need to do is use political means and to create a better government at the end of the day. They still provide us with no analysis on how the government actually becomes better on their side. Because we question, all you're doing is sure, the rebels might stop fighting you in the meantime, but let's say 2 years later, when they're finally fed up again, what's going to happen is you're going to create a vicious cycle and where rebels continuously try to topple governments. So what happens on your side is that you never create a country that's stable in any sense. You have to prove to us why exactly rebels will now all of a sudden start listening to governments. And lastly, we gave you the idea that rebels do not deserve a pardon, right? Rebels, there is no justified reason to give rebels pardon. Because the only standard they give us is that they cause a problem to the state. In that sense, there's so many other groups who cause problems to the state, like the ones I mentioned. Why aren't we pardoning them? But let's move on to my constructive very quickly. I tell you that in my constructive, what you do is that you allow these types of things to be justified within your state. We tell you that this breeds even more. We tell you this breeds even more injustice at the end of the day. And at the end of the day, you'll continue to have rebels fighting you, whether you like it or not. Because of the characterizations they gave you, one is that rebels are very intolerant, and two, the characterization they gave us that these states are very unstable, right? So we tell you that the only way you're going to create stability in your state is when the people who are going to fight your state in the future are punished and dealt with, and when you make it sure that people understand that this type of behavior is not acceptable in any country. If you have to understand that the rebels, that people like rebels why it's going to continue in the future. Well, let's move on to what I told you. I'm going to do a very short model comparison. Because what exactly do we get from this side? The goal of both sides is simple. We both want to get stability at the end of the day, but we also want to get retribution. What we tell you coming from our side is the only way you're going to get stability is if you allow our government to grow. Because we could see that the government is going to make mistakes, right? We could see to that. But the only way a government is going to properly grow is when it has the backing of the people. Because as a government, when you lose the backing of the people, what you do is that when you lose the backing of the people, what happens is that the government tends to fail. The reason why it's inherently going to happen even more on their side is because now rebels are in positions of powers where they can actually recruit even more people, and two, they also have better means to now overthrow the government. So what you do is on your side, you breathe the air of intolerance, and you tell people that if you're not happy with the government, all you have to do is grab a gun, follow us, and let's take the government down again. We've done it in the past anyway, and we're not being punished for it. You have to tell us why exactly these rebels aren't likely to fight against the government again, because you yourself even conceded there are going to be problems in the future. Let's move on to the second level, right? Let's go on further into their model itself, because they tell us that they're not even going to accept all rebels, only those they deem suitable. By doing that, you're going to aggravate the rebels even more who aren't picked, because by becoming selective, then you also concede that there are people who aren't going to be selected out of order. So what happens on your side is that you breed an even worse mentality for the rebels who aren't accepted. These rebels now start thinking, why are they being accepted and why aren't I? We think that it's even more harmful and that you're going to get even more rebels to fight you at the end of the day on your side. Because you come off as a government who's very selective in your thinking, and you come off as a government who only wants to cater to certain people. We tell you that that's another thing that you have to fix coming from your side. But let's move on to a few very, very problematic things in their case, right? The things that don't necessarily fit in the model. They told us that, well, we need protection from regional threats. We tell you that there are already international checks and balances that guard against these things, right? Things like allies with other countries, which we think are inherently even stronger on your side. We don't think countries like the US are going to want to ally with you, when the same people who are rebels are in your midst. It sends a message not only to the people, but to the international community that we're willing to have these types of people. But lastly, why is it so important for us to argue the principle of retribution and to argue why we can't pardon these people? That's extremely important because of the mindset that you set to people. Because like I said, if you continue to just give retribution to these people at the end of the day, you're going to continue a vicious cycle, and that's why you're never going to create stability on your side.
We think that their sole rebuttal cannot be picking holes at our principle and finding areas and specific scenarios which it doesn't sound completely consistent, right? Because our principle is pretty simple. And I'm going to talk to you about that in two main points of contention. Firstly, I'm going to talk about why our principle is principally justified for us to recruit rebels into the government's military. And secondly, even if it's unprincipally justified, why it's still necessary for the stability of the society and for the country's development as a whole. But firstly, on principle justification, they said it wasn't principally justified to pardon because it's not proportional to the atrocities that they commit. Literally, their only analysis was that people shouldn't get away with their crimes, right? There was nothing important about the importance of the principle and why we are the upholders in principle at the cost of all the harms that we brought up, right? But we're still going to rebut it anyway because we gave it the characterization of a very messy conflict zone, right? It is very hard for the people to prove crimes against humanity anyway, right? You have like dysfunctional courts. You are not able to prosecute people effectively, and that furthermore, what we told you was that the new government and the government in power probably also did these atrocities too, right? So they're probably also pretty inconsistent with their principle by not having the kind of crimes against humanity prosecuted on both sides of the government's house and the rebels' house. Given that the governments are probably going to go away scot-free with this, we don't see what's the important principle that we have to uphold at all costs, given that it's already inconsistent on their side of the house, right? But lastly, the law exists to help society, right? So the law is only helpful insofar as society party is benefited. We told you why it was necessary to have the kind of pardon in order to move on from the situation, in order to get away from the kind of conflict that you have in the bloody history that you had, right? But lastly, in the second speaker, they moved on and they kind of moved on from the principle and tried to argue that in certain cases, there is also effective and like practically justified for us to recruit people who have done wrong, right? We tell you that in certain scenarios, if you want to claim that it's probably better for stability, then we might do that too, right? But you cannot just retreat to the practical or drug laws, because drug laws, clearly, we see no good of the drug laws to the state and the usefulness of drug laws to the state, right? But you cannot retreat to the practical benefits when you want to stand for the principle too. But moving on quickly to my second point of contention, but why even if we disregard the principle, it's still so important to keep, to recruit rebels to the new government's ministry. Now, the first thing they said that was new was that rebels are able to recruit more people because now they're seen as in a position of power, right? No, clearly we dismantle the rebel groups by recruiting them into the military, right? So you're gonna have the top officers, top commanders who are fearful for their lives and fearful of being arrested to go into the military. That's the way you dismantle the people. That's the way you break down you completely break down the kind of organization, and you completely dismantle the group, right? Where you have the superiors. God, we didn't make it sound so easy for the new government to wrap up all the rebels and throw them into prison and like stamp on the rebel groups down, right? We know that there's no other solution on the other side of the house where rebels are going to continue in guerrilla warfare, right? Rebels are going to continue to stay underground because there's support of the citizenship base. And that's why we told you there was never once truly rebutted, because often it's not a situation in which the government can conclusively win like all the citizens, all the hearts and minds of the citizens, right? Often the rebels have like a big fan base, perhaps 40% of the citizens, which still had who believe strongly in them, right? This citizenship support base is so important because it's the most important way for them to continue like recruitment and continue guerrilla warfare, right? What happens is that you hide in homes, right? What we want to do is to make it seem like the rebels are integrated to the new government. When the rebels are integrated to the new government, they have no legitimate means to recruit new people because they have no message they can send and no strong message they can send, right? You cut off the most important part of the funding when you completely break it down. But rather, they talk about how, without the situation on our side, is that rebels often, they're more likely than not tired of fighting, right? More likely than not, they want to stop the fighting if they lost and they want to move on. But the problem is on their side, there is no opt-out clause to fighting. There is no choice to leave the fighting, right? Because of course, the rebels have no choice but to remain defiant because that's the only stance they can take if the government does not want to make peace with them. The government does not want to cooperate with them. If the government actively tries to find them, to arrest them, they are forced to continue their last-ditch attempt to save their own lives. Why is this so harmful? Because we gave you so many reasons, right? But more importantly, they wanted to talk about the military and how it was going harmful if rebels are accepted in. Firstly, we have to establish that this debate is about rebels who accept this situation, right? Which is why the second speaker's argument about how we made a principal concession is not true, right? Because this debate is about rebels who accept this pardon, right? All duty is to do is to actively recruit and to actively push out this kind of message. We don't have to take on the burden that we will manage to recruit all the rebels, right? So we're talking about rebels who want to take this exchange, right? They want the pardon. So presumably they wouldn't want to go into jail again for committing crimes in the military, right? We already told you in our first speaker that this military is conducted in a strict manner, right? There's a chain of command. You're under the control of your superiors, right? There are no ability the ability for you to uprise against is fairly limited because you have strict discipline. You have orders to do so, right? We have no burden on our side to put the rebels at the top of the chain of the command. We have no burden on our side to make the rebels fight against their fellow rebels, right? We have this is not our burden. Our only burden is to show that under the military, living in a strict chain of command, living with people in the new government, and living with your actions like monitored, and you not being able to have fairly limited like freedom of movement and freedom of movement out of the camps, and you have to stay in the camps for like weeks at a time or the weekdays. We think there's a fairly limited ability for you to organize yourself and to try to smuggle arms when you have the kind of when you can. We think it's a problem solution mismatch, right? Because you're able to go and pack like weapons and ensure that the weapons don't come out again, right? So we don't see how rebels have a medium to uprise again simply by providing them arms, right? Because they cannot use these arms in any other way than we tell you so. But the comparative is that they're still going to be armed if they're not in the armies, right? Because they're still going to be funded, perhaps by like overseas international groups that want to continue to fund rebels. For example, you're talking about rogue states that continue to fund rebels, right? So the comparative, we rather have them get weapons under our control, right? So we don't think their point stands at all. But lastly, they said that somehow, if it means you enter the military, then if you don't enter the military, they will only rebel politically in their first speaker. No, right? We already characterized you that it's about militant rebel groups, right? We're talking about post-conflict societies, right? These are rebels who have arms, right? Rebels who didn't rebel politically in the past already, right? So they have all the means to act out their violence again in their training, right? Because post-conflict societies doesn't mean that the rebels' arms immediately disappear, right? This is an important part about how rebels are good at fighting. They have significant numbers, they know the techniques, they are trained, they work like an army, and they're so important to the new group because stability is so important to the development of the country that you have to move on, you have to stop another civil war. You have to have a strong military in order to assert your dominance in the region as a new state. For all these reasons, go outside the house.
The only real benefit we get coming from government side in their model is that they want these rebels' voices to be heard, right? Because they're still a part of the society. They also give us these arguments on how they're also good fighters, but we see that's not really a benefit when these people are gonna end up plotting against the government in the first place. So we tell you the only real benefit we see coming from their side, because we still have a military on our side. It's not like we're never gonna have a military on our side. We can still recruit new people. So we don't exactly see the urgency of having to recruit these rebels, something that Marco brought up, which they never responded to. But we only see the only benefit they give us is that they want their voices to be heard. But I'll rebut that coming in my issues and why that actually never happens on their side, right? They also, and the main daunting issue coming from their side is that they tell us they will be able to control the rebels in response to our arguments because they have discipline, because they have a chain of command. But we tell you, the previous government couldn't even control these rebels in the very first place. And this is exactly why coup d'etats happen, right? Because even though my general says to be loyal to the government, and I'm very determined to be in a coup d'etat, I will not listen to him. What exactly is the real incentive for these rebels to follow this chain of command? They have never responded. And we exactly tell you why exactly these different ideologies are so important in this debate, right? Because this isn't just some disagreement. These can even go to the point, for example, of having different religions, having different types of government. And that can never be resolved by simply putting them in the military, right? It's only resolved when they actually want to topple down governments. That's exactly why we're prosecuting in the first place, because we already have the new government and we don't want them to topple it again. And moving them to the military actually incentivizes them to have the power to do this. And we tell you that is not the answer to a stable government. And then, so now on my two issues. Firstly, where do we best have a stable government? And secondly, where rebels will fight less at the end of the day, after my first issue. On first level, where the whip comes up here and tells us, this debate is about rebels who accept the pardon at the end of the day. But then they tell us they want people to have voices. We don't exactly see how this is inherently good for their side, right? Because when you only accept the people who are willing to work with the government, who are okay with the government's policy, how exactly are you going to have representation? Because what we see coming from our side with their arguments is that when you only accept the people who agree with the government, you never really get a voice. You only get the government's voice at the end of the day. So we don't exactly see how exactly the voices are heard, which is an argument from the PM, right? And because the other rebels who choose not to accept it because they aren't in line with the government are probably gonna rise up in conflict, right? Which is probably what caused the initial conflict before, because they didn't exactly agree with the ideologies after my first issue. And the second level, where they tell us, oh, they're good fighters. But we don't exactly tell you, but there's more to the military to that, which Mark already responded to. Because there are things such as rules of engagement, which rebels have to agree to, which soldiers have to agree to, loyalty, and all these other things aside from just fighting, because soldiers are way more than that. So what exactly is the main characteristic of a rebel, right? They don't exactly have to follow the rules because they're going against the party that creates these rules in the first place. So why exactly is this so harmful? Because when you're fighting to topple an oppressive government, something that's already been done in this paradigm, is that when you give them the power to do this, they will never really agree because they never had to follow any rules of engagement in the first place. So when you integrate them into the military, they won't exactly follow on who to shoot and not to shoot. They will simply think violence is the answer. And then their side tells us it's all right because it's a check and balance to the gov who has already done atrocities, right? But we tell you, how exactly is the government doing atrocities when it's a new government, right? And the very fact that they say it's a check and balance means that they concede to us that they have the power to tear down a government should it be oppressive. Something that we kept saying, right? That they do have the power to tear down the government, and these rebels that don't necessarily agree can eventually cause this vicious cycle of repeating conflict. But what exactly does our side have to bring in this issue on why rebels have the propensity for violence, right? Because we tell you they already think that violence is the answer. They already resolved an issue with violence, and they see that is the surefire way to topple a government. That will be their number one thought in going into toppling this issue. Before I move on.
You're talking about rebels who accept this pardon because they don't want to go to jail again. Presumably, every small misstep in the military can be clamped down on this problem solution mismatch.
But we tell you that not everyone's going to be accepted into the military, right? Is that when we don't accept everyone with a dissenting opinion from these rebels will eventually cause conflict at the end of the day because they don't get their voices heard, something that they never have, right? Now, on my second issue, on why rebels will less fight at the end of the day, because yes, what they have to bring into this issue, again, is strict discipline. But I've already told you in my first issue why that never happens, why we have coup d'etats in the very first place, especially even for people who have already gone through the training in the military, right? And then, so what exactly do they have to bring to us in this issue, right? Because they tell us, because coming from the PM, he already concedes to us, rebels don't agree. They have different ideologies, blah, 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 blah. And the only people that will accept this choice are the people who do agree. So then the people with the dissenting opinion will feel very left out. So we tell you, at the end of the day, rebels are more likely to fight on their side, right? Because they're people who never voice out their opinion coming from their side. But on our side, what we have to bring you is that you don't necessarily have to be in the military. And that actually puts everyone on a level playing field when it comes to their influence, when it comes to their voting powers. So we don't exactly see how so coming from our side, we actually create less incentive to fight, and at the end of the day, we still have we have more peace and order and a stable government. So what exactly did I have to bring to you? Why exactly rebels are less likely to fight on our side, and why exactly we're going to have a more stable government on our side, and why exactly we have more representation on our side, and why they don't have any real benefits compared to status quo. Thank you.
Thank you. The rest of the group decided to participate in one of the next pieces of the costume event.
Let's go back to the beginning and look at their principle logic, right? Because they tell us that to achieve stability, we need to co-opt these rebels into our military or else they won't stop fighting. In that case, what they're essentially saying is under the rug and just ignore them, then essentially your government is going to fail. You're never going to get stability on your side if you continue to ignore the problems. But let's move even further, right? Because they continue to tell us that these rebels want to fight. My partner told you in his speech, the first speaker told you in his speech, that the reason why the rebels won't necessarily continue the fight, and the reason why it's kind of on your side to now stop them, is because you empower them by placing them in the military. Our characterization that I also gave you. Because being part of the military is a position of power. When you're part of the military, you're lauded as a war hero, someone who is very influential in society. We tell you that this political capital now allows you to generate even more power for the rebel groups at the end of the day. Something that inherently they never responded to. But let's move even further, right? Just point out how they actually weakened their case in the last speaker. Because the first two speakers talked about how these rebels are going to continue fighting, but then the last speaker comes here and says that the reason why rebels won't fight is because they fear being imprisoned. So we question, if you're going to imprison them in the first place, why do they continue fighting? Why does it only work if they're put into the military? Because that's something that they have to look at, right? Because the first two speakers said that the reason why they fight is because they're going to be placed in jail. So if you tell me that in the military, if they can still be placed in jail, why won't they continue fighting? That's something that we never got an answer to, and that's something that inherently weakened the case line as a whole. Because when you really look at it in your head, and when you really analyze what's actually happening, is there's one rebel group who isn't going to be co-opted into the military, who's going to be the bad guys. And there's another rebel group who does get co-opted into the military, but on our one, they will eventually become intolerant with the government, because as they already conceded, the government is going to be somewhat unstable at the end of the day. So what we do now, coming from their side, is that we create two problems. One problem with the government, a problem with the rebel group within your military, and two, a rebel group outside. So why exactly do we have to win this debate? I already proved you why an issue when we talk about why the debate is so important, right? Because this has implications even further than just this debate. This has implications that tell you that if your society becomes a tolerant one, you're never going to be able to solve any problems, and you're never going to be stable. But let's move on to things like responsiveness, right? Because what they always fail to hear about are the actual means of our argument. And we find it completely ironic when the whip comes up here and says, you can't keep just poking holes in our arguments and choosing what to rebut. But that's exactly what they do. Because if they really wanted to rebut us, they would have rebutted our main principles, right? They never gave us the justification to why you have to be able to allow these people to be given a pardon at the end of the day. All they told us is that it's going to be beneficial to society. This doesn't necessarily prove why it's justifiable to give a pardon at the end of the day. And lastly, they never rebutted the idea that they're going to breed an era of tolerance and they're going to continue to have rebel groups continuously fighting against the military. It's also something they never rebutted to. We clearly told you on our side that we rebutted even their whole case line step by step, and I'm even continuing to do that in part of the speech. So we tell you clearly we have to win this debate because our issues are the more important ones and because we stand.
Thank you. Finally, debate over.
Try to accuse us of somehow not rebutting the entire case. But it's ironic that the only response to our entire characterization of the only reason why rebels fight is because they have no choice to, only came in third op, is an inconsistent principle anyway. What was their only response here? They told us that somehow opinions doesn't need to be represented in military, it can be represented in other means. Here's inconsistent because the entire case is premised on the fact that they want to stamp down rebels. If they want to stamp down rebels, we don't get why exactly they're telling us that the only rebuttal is that they can get other opinions anyway. Tell us inconsistent, it's too late for us to rebut, we tell you it's unfair. So that's two questions. One, that's why exactly the principle justified. Unless we'll be comparing the two principles that both sides brought out and tell you which is more important. Number two, let's ask why is it necessary that we put these rebels in military? Somehow they told us we never give them reasons, even though they gave them about 4 to 5 reasons. Now, first, let's look at what exactly is the principle that we are standing for. The only principle they understand for is retribution. Now, a few problems with this. One, they never actually proved to us why retribution is important, especially given the characteristic that brought out in our speakers. We told you why exactly in post-conflict societies, where the country is in shambles, you need a strong military, that we must look past retribution. Because there's so many more other benefits that you can take from. We told you things about how, firstly, like everyone did atrocities in war, right? It's extremely messy. It's hard to prosecute. There's no way you can really prosecute retribution on this sense because it's inconsistent. Because there are going to be people in new government committed atrocities as well. But more importantly, too, we thought it's far more important that we forego retribution in light of a better social good, right? Because when you take out retribution, they're sacrificing all the potential benefits you can get with rebels in the military, with people who are good in fighting in the military. We told you about how post-conflict societies lack trained fighters, and this is precisely what rebels bring to you in the military. They're able to be trained, they're disciplined, they have all the characteristics of what makes a good army soldier, which tells you why exactly retribution is not as important. Given it never wants people to ask why retribution is important in a post-conflict societies, we tell you we take this point, insofar as it proves some kind of benefit that comes out of this. We tell you that they never once dealt with our principle. Let's look at the second question then. Why is it necessary to put these rebels in the army? Now, firstly, we tell you that let's first establish this. Both sides consider that the end goals of stability. You want to achieve stability in a post-conflict society. So why is it that we put it far better? The only rebuttal to our entire characterization is that somehow we put them in position of power. These rebels are going to use the position to gain power and use it to overthrow the government. Here's all the reasons I brought out in our previous 3 speeches as to why it's not true. We'll tell you first, why is the reason why rebels fight in the first place? This is something that no one's responded, by the way. We told you the reason why rebels fight because they want to fight to gain representation in the government. But here's what you do on your side. You force them to continue fighting insofar as never give them any voice in the government, insofar as continue stamping on them on the government. Why do they have the ability to do this? We tell you things about guerrilla warfare. We tell you things about how they're still going to get weapons anyway because there are many groups that are funding these rebels. It's the reason why rebels are so strong in the first place, right? Because they have the ability to get weaponry, they have the ability to get funded by other nations. This is something once they never once contested. Therefore, I tell you it's a concession on their side. And given it's a concession, we tell you it's important because this means that they're on their side. The comparative is this: the rebels are still going to continue fighting, and on their side, they're going to force these rebels to fight as a comparative on our side. That at least we're able to put them under military power. At least we're able to give them a reason and incentive to work with the government. We tell you it's important that we brought up right from first speaker. That at the very least, we send a message that the government is cooperative to the rebels. Right? We tell you it's important the government cannot be antagonistic to the rebels, given it's new, given it's not, it doesn't have a strong military in the first place. So it's important that the government work towards steps of cooperation in order to achieve stability. Given that we characterize what exactly stability is about, we tell you to take this point. But let's continue on this. Let's take it with the best case scenario. Let's take it as somehow even if all the rebels got arrested, why is it that they still have net harm on their side? Because the net harm is this. They lose the valuable fighters that can appear in the military on their side. They lose the people who are able to achieve all the benefits that are on top of things like stability, things like preventing overthrowing on their side. They accuse us of only having one benefit, which is to have rebels fight in the army, right? No, that's not true, right? That's because they never once responded to all the other benefits that we talk about in our speeches. We'll tell you things about firstly, you cooperate with the rebel groups to achieve some kind of cooperation in the first place. Secondly, and more importantly, you cooperate with civilians in the first place. How many you recognize this? This is a characterization never contested, but the rebel groups to some extent has strong support from the civilians. That's why they're able to hide in civilian villages to continue attacking the old regime. That's why they're able to use civilian resources to feed themselves to be able to fight against the old regime. Therefore, we tell you it's important because insofar as they can never achieve the cooperation we want to talk about when civilians start seeing the government antagonistic to its rebels. This is precisely what creates the overthrowing of government they don't want to talk about, they want to prevent on their side. Because of all these reasons, we better allow stability. I'm extremely proud to propose.